When Emma slipped that desperate note across his table, millionaire Daniel thought he was just helping a stranger. He had no idea he was about to face the most dangerous game of his life, but no one imagined what would come next. Subscribe now, or the algorithm might separate us forever. Like, comment, and share to stay connected. Let's begin our story. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany tables of Le Bernardin as Daniel Winchester adjusted his platinum Rolex and stabbed at his truffle risotto with practiced indifference. At 34, he owned half of Manhattan's commercial real estate, yet nothing could fill the emptiness that plagued him during these solitary lunches. More wine, sir? The sommelier hovered nearby with a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Daniel waved him away without looking up from his phone, where stock prices flickered in endless green and red patterns. Winchester Enterprises had just closed another billion-dollar deal, but the victory felt hollow. Success had become as routine as breathing. A soft rustle made him glance up as the waitress approached his table. She moved with careful grace, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that revealed elegant cheekbones. Her uniform was pressed and pristine, but something in her green eyes made Daniel pause mid-scroll. "Your appetizer, Mr. Winchester." Her voice carried a slight tremor as she placed the plate before him. "I didn't order an appetizer." Daniel's tone was sharp, businesslike. He prided himself on efficiency, and mistakes irritated him immensely. "It's compliments of the house." She lingered a moment too long, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the silverware. "Please enjoy." As she turned to leave, Daniel noticed a small piece of paper tucked beneath his water glass. Curious despite himself, he unfolded it discreetly. The message was written in elegant script that spoke of education despite her humble position. "Please pretend you know me. My life depends on it. I'll explain everything. Emma." Daniel's eyes snapped up to find the waitress, Emma, watching him from across the room. Her face was pale, and she kept glancing toward the restaurant's entrance with barely concealed fear. Two men in expensive suits had just walked in, their eyes systematically scanning every face in the dining room. Every instinct told Daniel to mind his own business. He hadn't built an empire by getting involved in other people's problems. But something about the quiet desperation in Emma's eyes triggered an unexpected protective urge. The men approached her with predatory smiles. "Emma Catherine Morrison," the taller one said quietly. "Time to come home." "I'm sorry, you must be mistaken." Emma's voice remained steady, but Daniel could see her knuckles white as she gripped her serving tray. "I don't know who you're looking for. Don't make this difficult. Your father wants to see you." Daniel found himself standing before he'd consciously decided to move. "Emma, darling." His voice carried across the restaurant with commanding authority. "Is everything all right?" Every head turned toward him as he strode across the room with the confidence that came from owning buildings taller than cathedrals. The two men immediately stepped back, recognizing the kind of power that could make or break careers with a single phone call. "Daniel." Emma's relief was so genuine it almost fooled him. "I was just explaining to these gentlemen that I'm working." "Gentlemen?" Daniel's smile never reached his eyes as he extended his hand. "Daniel Winchester." "And you are?" The taller man hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "Marcus Fleming. We're old family friends of Emma's." "How lovely. I'm sure you understand that Emma and I have dinner plans this evening." Daniel's arm moved protectively around Emma's shoulders, and he felt her relax slightly against him. "Perhaps you could call her later to arrange a reunion." "Of course." Marcus's eyes hardened, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Emma, we'll be in touch." As the men retreated, Daniel kept his arm around Emma until they disappeared through the entrance. Only then did he step back, his expression shifting to cool assessment. "My office, 20 minutes. He slipped her a business card. "We need to talk." Emma nodded, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and gratitude. "Thank you. I know this seems—" 20 minutes, Miss Morrison." Daniel was already walking away, his mind racing with questions and a strange sense that his perfectly ordered world was about to change forever. Back at his table, he left enough cash to cover a week's worth of meals and headed for the exit. As his driver held open the door of his black Bentley, Daniel caught Emma's reflection in the restaurant window. She was watching him leave with an expression he couldn't quite read, part gratitude, part something that looked almost like recognition. The drive to Winchester Tower took 12 minutes through Manhattan traffic that parted before his car like the Red Sea. Daniel used every second to run through possibilities. Corporate espionage was common in his world, but something about Emma's refined speech and the way she carried herself suggested this was personal, not professional. His assistant, Margaret, barely looked up as he strode through the marble lobby of his penthouse office. "Your 2:30 is waiting in conference room A and cancel everything for the next hour." Daniel loosened his tie as he entered his sanctuary of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Central Park, while Persian rugs and original Monets reminded visitors that power came with privileges. Exactly 20 minutes later, Margaret's voice crackled through the intercom. "A Miss Morrison to see you, sir." "Send her in." Emma entered tentatively, her server's uniform replaced by a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both modest and stunning. Without the stress of immediate danger, Daniel could see that she was genuinely beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with cosmetics or fashion. "Please, sit." He gestured to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, noting how she perched on its edge as if ready to flee. "Now, Miss Morrison, perhaps you'd like to explain why I just became an accessory to whatever drama you're running from." Emma's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm sorry for involving you, Mr. Winchester. I was desperate and you seemed—" She trailed off, studying his face with unsettling intensity. "I seemed what exactly?" "Safe." The word came out barely above a whisper. "You seemed safe." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "Those men knew your full name. They mentioned your father. This isn't some random harassment case, is it?" "No." Emma's voice grew stronger. "It's not. Are you in some kind of trouble with the law? Not the kind you're thinking of." She met his eyes directly for the first time. "Mr. Winchester, how much do you know about Morrison International?" The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Morrison International had been one of the largest shipping conglomerates on the East Coast until it collapsed spectacularly 8 years ago amid accusations of embezzlement and fraud. The scandal had dominated financial news for months. Charles Morrison was arrested for fraud, Daniel said carefully. The company was liquidated. There were rumors about missing assets worth hundreds of millions. Charles Morrison was my father. Emma's chin lifted defiantly. And he was innocent. Daniel's expression didn't change, but Emma caught the slight tightening around his eyes. She'd expected skepticism. Everyone believed her father was guilty. The media had painted him as another greedy corporate executive who'd stolen from his own employees' pension funds. "Miss Morrison, Emma, I'm going to need significantly more context before I can help you." Daniel's voice remained professionally neutral. "Your father was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. My father was framed." Emma stood and began pacing his office, her controlled composure finally cracking. "Someone systematically destroyed our family, stole our company, and sent an innocent man to prison where he died 2 years later from a heart attack brought on by stress and shame. And you have proof of this?" Emma stopped pacing and turned to face him. "I've spent the last 8 years gathering evidence, working minimum wage jobs, living in tiny apartments, using different names to stay hidden while I pieced together the truth." "Hidden from whom?" "From the people who framed him, the same people who sent Marcus Fleming to drag me back today." Emma's voice grew bitter. "They thought they'd destroyed our family completely. But I survived and I know things that could send them to prison for the rest of their lives." Daniel studied her carefully. Her posture was straight-backed and dignified despite her circumstances, and when she spoke about her father, her educated accent became more pronounced. This wasn't some delusional waitress spinning fantasies. Emma Morrison was clearly intelligent and determined. "Why come forward now? Why not take your evidence to the FBI?" "Because I tried that. Twice." Emma's laugh held no humor. "The corruption goes deeper than I originally thought. People I trusted with information ended up dead in accidents or suddenly developed amnesia about our meetings. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Emma pulled a small flash drive from her purse. Everything's on here. Bank records, emails, recordings of phone conversations. 8 years of my life condensed into 64 gigabytes of evidence. Daniel made no move to take the drive. And what exactly do you want from me, Miss Morrison? Protection while I find someone in law enforcement who can't be bought. Emma's eyes met his steadily. I need time to make copies, to verify which authorities are clean, and to prepare for the firestorm that's coming when this goes public. Why should I believe any of this? Because, Emma said quietly, you knew my father. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Daniel's carefully controlled expression flickered for just a moment, long enough for Emma to know she'd hit her mark. I've never met Charles Morrison. No, but your father did, regularly. Emma's voice was gentle, but implacable. Morrison International and Winchester Development were partners on the Harbor Point project. My father spoke about Robert Winchester often, said he was one of the few honest men in real estate development. Daniel's jaw tightened. His father had died when Daniel was 26, just as he was taking control of Winchester Enterprises. My father worked with many companies. He also worked very late the night before my father was arrested. Emma pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph of 2 men in what appeared to be Daniel's father's office. This was taken by a security camera in your building 8 years ago. Recognize either of them? Daniel's breath caught. The photo clearly showed his father sitting across from Charles Morrison, both men looking exhausted and worried. Timestamps proved it was taken at 2:47 a.m. How did you get this? I told you. 8 years of investigation. Emma's voice softened. Your father was trying to help mine that night. They were going through financial records, trying to trace where the stolen money had actually gone. If that's true, why didn't my father come forward during the trial? Emma's expression grew pained. Because he died in a car accident the next morning. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of Manhattan traffic, 40 floors below. Daniel stared at the photograph, his mind racing through memories of his father's final weeks. Robert Winchester had been distracted, worried about something he'd refused to discuss. The accident had been ruled mechanical failure, a tragic loss that had devastated Daniel personally and professionally. You're suggesting my father was murdered. I'm suggesting your father discovered the same evidence that got mine framed. Emma's voice was barely audible. And I think whoever killed him has been watching the Winchester family ever since, making sure no one asks uncomfortable questions. Daniel set the phone down carefully, his hand steadier than he felt. Miss Morrison, do you realize what you're asking? You want me to believe that my father's death wasn't an accident, that there's been a conspiracy spanning 8 years, and that I should risk everything I've built to help you expose it? No. Emma moved closer to his desk, her green eyes blazing with conviction. I'm asking you to help me find the truth about both our fathers, and maybe save yourself in the process. Save myself from what? Think about it, Daniel. Emma's use of his first name sent an unexpected jolt through him. You're 34 years old, unmarried, no close friends, no serious romantic relationships. You work 18-hour days and eat lunch alone in restaurants that cost more than most people make in a month. When was the last time you actually enjoyed anything? My personal life is none of your concern. Isn't it? Emma's smile was sad but knowing. You saved me today because something inside you recognized a kindred spirit. We're both orphans, both fighting battles that have consumed our lives. The only difference is that I know what I'm fighting against. Daniel stood abruptly and walked to his window, staring out at the city he'd conquered but never truly possessed. Emma was right about his isolation, though he'd never admitted it even to himself. Success had cost him every meaningful relationship he'd ever had. Let's say I believe you, he said without turning around. What makes you think we can succeed where you failed for 8 years? Because now I'm not alone. Emma's reflection appeared beside his in the window. And because you have resources I could never access. Money, connections, private security, legal teams that can't be intimidated or bought. And what do you bring to this partnership besides danger and conspiracy theories? Emma was quiet for so long that Daniel finally turned to look at her. She was studying his face with that intense focus again, as if memorizing every detail. "I bring the truth," she said finally. "And something else you've been missing for a very long time. Which is? A reason to care about something more than profit margins." Emma moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "When was the last time you felt truly alive, Daniel Winchester?" Before he could answer, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Winchester, there are two gentlemen here who say they need to speak with you urgently about Miss Morrison." Daniel and Emma locked eyes. Marcus Fleming had found them faster than either had expected. "Send them up," Daniel said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Emma. "Miss Morrison and I have quite a lot to discuss." Marcus Fleming entered Daniel's office with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His companion, a shorter man with cold eyes and expensive suit, remained by the door like a guard. Daniel stayed seated behind his desk, projecting the kind of casual authority that came from controlling billion-dollar deals. "Mr. Winchester, thank you for seeing us." Marcus's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I believe you've met Emma. Miss Morrison and I were just discussing her employment opportunities." Daniel's voice was perfectly level. "She's quite impressive." Emma stood beside Daniel's chair, her hand resting lightly on the back, a subtle show of solidarity that wasn't lost on either visitor. She'd changed during the few minutes since Margaret's warning, her posture more confident, her expression calm. Daniel found himself admiring her composure under pressure. "I'm sure she is." Marcus's eyes never left Emma's face. "However, Miss Morrison has family obligations that require her immediate attention." "I'm 25 years old, Mr. Fleming." Emma's voice carried just the right note of confused innocence. "I don't have any family. Your grandfather is quite anxious to see you, Emma. He's been worried sick since you disappeared." Daniel watched Emma's face carefully and caught the flash of genuine surprise before she masked it. Whatever game Fleming was playing, this grandfather angle was news to her. "My grandfather died when I was 12, Emma said flatly. "Your maternal grandfather, Emanuel Rostov, is very much alive and very eager to reunite with his only remaining family." Marcus reached into his jacket and produced a leather portfolio. "He's prepared to offer you a rather substantial inheritance in exchange for your return to the family fold." Emanuel Rostov. Daniel recognized the name immediately. Russian shipping magnate, rumors of organized crime connections, currently worth somewhere north of $2 billion. If Emma was Rostov's granddaughter, the Morrison International scandal suddenly made much more sense, and much more dangerous. "I've never heard of Emanuel Rostov," Emma said, but Daniel caught the slight tremor in her voice. "Your mother was Elena Rostov before she married Charles Morrison." Marcus's smile widened. "Perhaps she never mentioned her family's business interests." Emma's hand tightened on Daniel's chair. "My mother died when I was 16. She never spoke about any relatives." "Understandable. The Rostov family had a falling out with Elena when she married your father. But time heals all wounds, and your grandfather is prepared to forgive past disagreements." Marcus placed several photographs on Daniel's desk. "These were taken at your parents' wedding. Elena looks very much like you, don't you think?" Daniel glanced at the photos and felt his stomach drop. The resemblance between Emma and the young woman in the wedding dress was unmistakable. More unsettling were the other faces in the crowd, men he recognized from FBI most wanted lists and international watch reports. "Your grandfather controls shipping routes throughout Eastern Europe and South America," Marcus continued. "He's prepared to make you a partner in those operations, with full access to the family fortune. All he asks in return is your loyalty and discretion regarding past misunderstandings." "What kind of misunderstandings?" Daniel interjected. Marcus's attention shifted to him with laser focus. "Mr. Winchester, with all due respect, this is a family matter. Miss Morrison is considering a position with my company. I have a vested interest in ensuring my potential employees aren't involved in anything that might create legal complications. I can assure you that working with the Rostov family would be far more lucrative than any position Winchester Enterprises could offer." Marcus's tone carried a subtle threat. Your father understood the benefits of cooperation with the right people. The words hit Daniel like a slap. What did you just say? Your father was a pragmatic man, Mr. Winchester. He knew when to mind his own business and when to be helpful. Marcus's smile turned predatory. Unfortunately, Charles Morrison never learned that lesson. Emma stepped forward, her fear finally showing. Are you threatening us? I'm offering you opportunities. Marcus collected the photographs from Daniel's desk. Emma, your grandfather expects you for dinner tomorrow evening. The address is in this envelope, along with documentation proving your heritage and inheritance rights. He placed a thick manila envelope next to Daniel's computer. Mr. Winchester, I trust you'll encourage Miss Morrison to make the right choice. Your father would have wanted you to stay out of matters that don't concern you. As quickly as they'd arrived, Marcus and his companion were gone, leaving Daniel and Emma alone with the suffocating weight of implications and threats. Emma sank into the chair across from Daniel's desk, her composure finally cracking. I swear to you I had no idea about any grandfather or Russian connections. But you recognize the possibility. Daniel's voice was sharp. Something about this makes sense to you. My mother. Emma pressed her hands to her temples. She spoke Russian sometimes when she was upset. And she was terrified of certain news stories, anything about organized crime or shipping industry investigations. I always thought it was just because of my father's business troubles. Daniel opened the envelope Marcus had left behind. Inside were birth certificates, immigration records, and DNA test results that appeared to confirm Emma's relationship to Emmanuel Rostov. There were also financial documents showing accounts with her name holding millions of dollars. This is why those men found you today, Daniel said grimly. Your grandfather didn't just discover your existence. He's been watching you for years, waiting for the right moment to make contact. But why now? Why after all this time? Daniel continued reading through the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. Because Emmanuel Rostov is dying. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live according to these medical reports. He needs an heir to inherit his empire, and you're the only family he has left. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. And if I refuse? Based on Marcus Fleming's demeanor, I don't think refusal is an option they're prepared to accept. Daniel looked up from the papers. Emma, do you understand what you've stumbled into? This isn't just about clearing your father's name anymore. You're the potential heir to a criminal empire worth billions of dollars. I don't want their money. Emma's voice was fierce. I want justice for my father. Those might be mutually exclusive goals. Daniel stood and walked to his window again, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. If Rostov was involved in framing your father, confronting him could get us both killed. Us? Emma looked up at him with surprise. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He turned back to face her, and Emma was startled by the intensity in his dark eyes. Marcus Fleming made this personal when he threatened me with my father's example. I want to know exactly what happened to Robert Winchester, and I want to know why these people think they can manipulate my decisions. Emma stood slowly, hope and fear warring in her expression. Are you sure? This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you asked for my help. Daniel moved closer to her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. Besides, you were right about something. I have been missing a reason to care about more than profit margins. Daniel. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. We're going to need somewhere safe to plan our next move. Somewhere your grandfather's people can't reach us. Daniel's hand moved to touch her cheek, a gesture that surprised them both. Do you trust me? I don't have much choice. Emma's smile was tremulous but genuine. But yes, I trust you. Good, because we're about to declare war on one of the most dangerous men in the world. Daniel's thumb traced across her cheekbone. And I have a feeling our lives are never going to be the same. As Emma leaned into his touch, neither of them noticed the small surveillance device that Marcus Fleming had planted behind Daniel's bookshelf, or the fact that their entire conversation had been transmitted directly to Emmanuel Rostov's compound in Brooklyn, where the dying patriarch was already making plans for his granddaughter's inevitable homecoming. The safe house was a penthouse Daniel owned under a shell corporation, overlooking the Hudson River from the Upper West Side. As Emma stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights shimmer on the water, Daniel worked furiously at his laptop, using encrypted connections to dig deeper into the Rostov family's operations. "We have a problem," he announced after 2 hours of research. "A big one." Emma turned from the window, noting the tension in his shoulders. "What did you find?" "Your grandfather doesn't just want you back for sentimental reasons. Emmanuel Rostov is facing federal indictments on 17 counts of money laundering, human trafficking, and racketeering. The government has been building a case against him for 3 years. And if he dies before trial, his entire empire gets seized by the federal government under RICO statutes. But if he has a legitimate heir with no criminal background..." Daniel's expression was grim. "Someone like you could inherit everything legally, then choose to cooperate with law enforcement in exchange for immunity." Emma sank onto the leather sofa, the implications hitting her like physical blows. "He wants to use me as a shield. Worse than that, I found records of shell companies' offshore accounts, real estate holdings worth over $4 billion. If you're declared his heir, you become responsible for cleaning up his criminal enterprises. You'd be trapped, cooperate with his operation, or face prosecution yourself. There has to be a way out." "What if I refuse the inheritance?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Emma, these people killed your father and mine to protect their secrets. Do you really think they'll just let you walk away now that you know the truth?" The weight of their situation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Emma pulled her knees to her chest, looking younger and more vulnerable than her 25 years. Daniel fought the urge to comfort her physically. They were in enough danger without adding romantic complications. "There's something else," Daniel said quietly. "I found communications between Rostov's organization and Winchester Enterprises. Financial transactions dating back 12 years. Emma's head snapped up. "What kind of transactions?" "Money laundering through real estate purchases. My father's company was used to clean Rostov's drug money without my father's knowledge." Daniel's voice was tight with controlled rage. "When Charles Morrison started investigating irregularities in the shipping routes, he discovered the connection. That's why both our fathers had to die. Who else knows about this? That's what terrifies me. These financial records should have been discovered years ago during federal investigations. The fact that they're still buried means Rostov has people inside law enforcement, maybe even the FBI." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of their predicament. "So we can't trust anyone in authority. We can't run because they'll find us, and we can't fight because they have unlimited resources and government connections. There might be one option." Daniel closed his laptop and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "It's dangerous, probably suicidal, but it's the only play I can see. Tell me, we give Rostov exactly what he wants. You agree to meet with him, accept your position as his heir, and get close enough to gather evidence that even corrupt federal agents can't ignore." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to walk into the lion's den voluntarily?" "I want us to walk in together." Daniel's hand covered hers. "As your business partner and romantic interest. Rostov expects you to eventually take control of legitimate business operations. That's how money laundering works. You need someone with my background to help transition the criminal enterprises into legal investments. Daniel, if they discover what we're really doing, they'll kill us both, I know." His thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that was becoming dangerously familiar. "But Emma, we're dead anyway if we don't try. And this way, we might actually save other people from becoming their victims." Emma studied his face, seeing determination mixed with something deeper in his dark eyes. "Why are you willing to risk everything for me? We barely know each other." Daniel was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because for the first time in 8 years, I feel like I'm fighting for something that matters. My father built Winchester Enterprises to help people, to create homes and communities. I turned it into a machine for generating profit. Maybe this is my chance to honor his memory properly. And if we don't survive, then at least we'll die fighting for justice instead of hiding in fear." Daniel's hand moved to cup her cheek. Emma, I know this is insane, but I think I'm falling. His phone buzzed with an urgent message. Daniel's expression hardened as he read it. What is it? Marcus Fleming. He knows we're here. Daniel showed her the text. Mr. Winchester, Mr. Rostov requests your presence at dinner tomorrow evening along with his granddaughter. The car will arrive at 7 p.m. I trust you'll both be ready. Emma felt ice forming in her stomach. How did they find us so quickly? Daniel was already moving toward his wall safe, pulling out documents and cash. Professional surveillance teams, probably government-grade equipment. We need to leave. Now. Where can we go that they won't find us? Nowhere. Daniel's voice was flat with resignation. Emma, I think it's time to accept that we're out of options. Tomorrow night, we're going to meet your grandfather. As they gathered their belongings, neither Daniel nor Emma noticed the small drone hovering outside their window, its cameras recording every word of their conversation. In a warehouse across the river, Marcus Fleming smiled as he watched their desperate planning unfold on multiple screens. Emmanuel Rostov might be dying, but his reach was still long enough to control every move his granddaughter made. Tomorrow's dinner would be more than a family reunion. It would be the moment Emma Morrison learned that some prisons were built from family obligations and escape was never really an option. The game was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The Rostov compound in Brighton Beach looked like a fortress disguised as a mansion. 20-foot walls topped with razor wire surrounded a Georgian-style estate that screamed new money and old-world paranoia. As their black sedan approached the iron gates, Emma gripped Daniel's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Remember, Daniel murmured, we're here because we want to be. You're curious about your heritage. I'm interested in legitimate business opportunities, nothing more. And if he suspects what we're really doing, then we improvise and hope we're faster than his security team. The gates opened silently, revealing a circular driveway lined with armed guards who didn't bother to hide their weapons. Marcus Fleming waited at the front entrance, his predatory smile wider than ever. Welcome home, Emma. His tone was mockingly warm. Your grandfather has been counting the minutes. Inside, the mansion was a testament to excessive wealth and questionable taste. Gold-leafed everything, priceless art hung next to gaudy family portraits, and crystal chandeliers that belonged in Versailles. Emma felt nauseated by the ostentatious display, knowing it was all built on suffering and crime. Emmanuel Rostov received them in a library that could have housed a small university. At 78, he was still an imposing figure despite the cancer ravaging his body. His pale blue eyes, so similar to Emma's mother's, studied his granddaughter with undisguised hunger. Ekaterina. His voice carried a heavy Russian accent and decades of command. You look exactly like your mother at your age. My name is Emma. Her voice was steady despite her fear. Emma is the name of a servant girl hiding from her destiny. You are Ekaterina Rostova, heir to an empire your mother was too weak to claim. Emmanuel gestured for them to sit in chairs clearly positioned to make them feel small and vulnerable. Mr. Winchester, I trust you understand the magnitude of what you've become involved in. I understand you're offering Emma opportunities to legitimize family business interests. Daniel's tone was carefully neutral. That's exactly the kind of diversification Winchester Enterprises specializes in. Emmanuel's laugh was a harsh bark. Diversification, yes, I suppose that's one word for it. His attention shifted back to Emma. Tell me, child, what do you know about your mother's life before she betrayed our family? I know she was happy with my father. That's all that matters. Elena was promised in marriage to Dmitry Volkov when she was 16. The union would have connected our shipping empire with his distribution networks throughout Eastern Europe. Instead, she ran away with a weak American businessman who understood nothing about power or loyalty. Emma's jaw tightened. My father was a good man. Your father was a fool who got in the way of business. Emmanuel's voice turned arctic. Just as you are getting in the way now. Daniel felt Emma tense beside him. Mr. Rostov, perhaps we should discuss the specific opportunities you mentioned. Emma and I are both interested in building something legitimate. Are you? Emmanuel's pale eyes fixed on Daniel with laser intensity. Tell me, Mr. Winchester, what did your father say about our business relationship before his unfortunate accident? The question was a trap, and Daniel knew it. My father kept his business dealings confidential. I learned about your connection through my own research. Your own research. Emmanuel nodded slowly. And what did this research reveal? That Rostov Shipping moved substantial cargo through ports where Winchester Development built warehouses and distribution centers. That money from those relationships helped fund some of our largest projects. Daniel met the old man's stare steadily. I also discovered that my father was investigating discrepancies in shipping manifests shortly before his death. The library fell silent except for the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock. Emmanuel's expression didn't change, but Marcus Fleming shifted position slightly, his hand moving closer to his concealed weapon. Your father was an idealist, Mr. Winchester. He believed in concepts like justice and moral responsibility. Such beliefs can be limiting in international business. They can also be profitable in the long term. Legitimate businesses don't face federal investigations or asset seizures. True. Emmanuel smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Which is why I need Ekaterina to help transition our operations into something more sustainable. Emma found her voice. And if I refuse? You won't refuse. Emmanuel's confidence was absolute. Because you're intelligent enough to understand your situation. Marcus, show them the surveillance footage. Fleming activated a large screen that descended from the ceiling. Video feeds showed Daniel's safe house, his office building, Emma's former apartment, even the restaurant where they'd first met. The message was clear. They'd been watched from the very beginning. We've been monitoring your investigation for months, Emmanuel continued. Every document you've collected, every conversation you've had, every plan you've made. Did you really think you could outsmart an organization that has survived decades of federal scrutiny? Emma's voice was barely audible. You knew. From the beginning, you knew what I was doing. Of course. Marcus has been feeding you information, guiding your research toward discoveries we wanted you to make. Your father's innocence, the connection to Winchester Enterprises, even the evidence of our money laundering operations, all carefully orchestrated to bring you here tonight. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The flash drive Emma showed me contains exactly what we wanted you to see. Nothing more, nothing less. Emmanuel's smile widened. You see, Mr. Winchester, legitimate businessmen like your father always make the same mistake. They believe that truth and justice will eventually prevail. But sometimes the truth is what powerful people decide it should be. Emma stood abruptly, her face flushed with rage and betrayal. You bastard. You let me think I was fighting for my father's honor when you're the one who destroyed him. I am the one who elevated him. Charles Morrison was nobody until he married into our family. His shipping business thrived because of our protection and connections, when he chose to bite the hand that fed him. You had him murdered. I had him neutralized. Emmanuel's voice held no remorse. Just as I had Robert Winchester neutralized when he became inconvenient. Just as I can have anyone neutralized who threatens our family's interests. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Daniel moved protectively closer to Emma, his mind racing through escape scenarios and finding none that didn't end in immediate death. However, Emmanuel continued, I prefer cooperation to elimination. Ekaterina, you will accept your position as my heir. You will use Mr. Winchester's expertise to legitimize our operations. And you will do this willingly, because the alternative is watching everyone you care about die slowly and painfully. Emma's hands shook with fury. I'll never help you. Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll ensure that every employee of Winchester Enterprises, all 4,000 of them, loses their jobs, their homes, and their family's security. I'll destroy their lives one by one until you agree to cooperate. Daniel felt something snap inside him. You're insane if you think we'll help you hurt innocent people. Then you're both more naive than I thought. Emmanuel pressed a button on his chair and 6 armed guards entered the library. Marcus, escort our guests to the East Wing. They'll need time to consider their options before dinner. As they were led away at gunpoint, Emma caught Daniel's eye. She saw determination there instead of defeat, and something else. a plan forming behind his dark gaze. Emmanuel Rostov had made two critical mistakes. He'd assumed that Daniel's morality would paralyze him with indecision, and he'd underestimated the lengths that two people would go to protect each other. Those mistakes were about to cost him everything. The East Wing turned out to be a luxurious prison, beautiful rooms with locked doors and barred windows overlooking the compound's private beach. As guards patrolled outside their adjacent suites, Daniel and Emma discovered they could communicate through a shared balcony that surveillance cameras couldn't monitor. "Tell me you have a plan," Emma whispered as they huddled in the shadows between their rooms. "I have a plan. You're not going to like it." Daniel's voice was grim. "How good are you at playing the role of a grateful granddaughter?" "Daniel, whatever you're thinking, Emma, listen to me. Rostov made a critical error tonight. He showed us his entire surveillance network, his security protocols, and most importantly, his weakness." "What weakness? The man controls a criminal empire worth billions." "He's dying. And he's desperate." Daniel pulled out his phone, showing her a message he'd typed but not sent. "He needs you to voluntarily accept your inheritance for legal reasons. If you're coerced or forced, federal courts can invalidate the transfer even after his death." Emma studied the message, a detailed explanation of their situation sent to someone named Senator Catherine Walsh, Judiciary Committee. "You're going to expose everything?" "We're going to expose everything. But first you have to convince him that you've accepted your fate. Make him believe he's won, that you're ready to take your place in the family business. And then we destroy him from the inside." Daniel's smile was predatory. "Rostov thinks he's been manipulating us, but he made one crucial mistake. He brought us here together, gave us access to his home base, and surrounded us with evidence of his crimes." Emma felt a spark of hope. "What do you need me to do?" "Be the granddaughter he wants. Ask about family history. Express interest in learning the business. Make him believe you're finally ready to embrace your heritage. Can you do that?" "I can do that." Emma's voice grew stronger. "But Daniel, if this goes wrong..." "It won't go wrong." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite their desperate circumstances. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you before we walk back into that room." "What?" "I love you." The words came out rushed, as if he'd been holding them back for days. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 48 hours, but I love you. And I need you to know that whatever happens tonight, fighting beside you has been the most meaningful thing I've ever done." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, oh, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." He kissed her forehead softly. "Ready to save the world?" "Ready." 20 minutes later, they were escorted back to Emmanuel's dining room, where a feast had been laid out on a table that could seat 20. The old man sat at the head, flanked by Marcus Fleming and two other men Emma didn't recognize. "I trust you've had time to consider your situation," Emmanuel said, as they took their assigned seats. Emma straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "I have, and I want to know about my mother's life before she left. I want to understand what I'm inheriting." Emmanuel's expression brightened with genuine pleasure. "Now you sound like a Rostova." Elena was the most beautiful woman in Brighton Beach, intelligent and fierce. She could have ruled beside Dmitry Volkov, controlled shipping routes from Vladivostok to New York. Why did she leave? She was young and romantic. She believed love was more important than power. Emmanuel's voice held old pain. Charles Morrison convinced her that she could be happy in poverty, as long as they were together. Foolish sentiment. Emma forced herself to nod sympathetically. But she was wrong. Of course she was wrong. Love fades, Ekaterina. Power endures. Emmanuel gestured to the opulent room around them. This is your birthright. Shipping companies, real estate empires, political connections that reach the highest levels of government. And the illegal activities? Temporary necessities. With your legitimacy and Mr. Winchester's expertise, we can transition everything into clean investments within 5 years. You'll inherit a legal empire worth more than most countries' GDP. Daniel leaned forward with what appeared to be genuine interest. What's the timeline for this transition? We begin immediately. Tomorrow? Ekaterina signs documents accepting her position as my heir. By the end of the week, you'll both be integrated into our operations. Emmanuel raised his wine glass. To family reunions and profitable partnerships. As they clinked glasses, Emma felt her phone vibrate with an incoming message. Under the table, she saw Daniel's text. Now. Emma stood gracefully, moving to embrace her grandfather. Thank you for giving me the chance to understand my heritage. As Emmanuel awkwardly returned the hug, Emma pressed a small device against his jacket, a listening device Daniel had hidden in his phone case. Across the room, Daniel excused himself to use the restroom, planting similar devices throughout the mansion. For the next 2 hours, they played their roles perfectly. Emma asked questions about family history while Daniel discussed laundering techniques with Marcus Fleming. All the while, their devices recorded conversations, financial details, and criminal confessions that would bring down the entire organization. At midnight, Emmanuel finally retired, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Tomorrow begins your new life, Ekaterina. Sleep well. As guards escorted them back to their rooms, Emma and Daniel exchanged glances full of love and determination. They'd gathered enough evidence to destroy Rostov's empire, but their most dangerous work still lay ahead. In the pre-dawn darkness, Daniel activated the transmitter he'd hidden in Emmanuel's study. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence they'd gathered uploaded instantly to Senator Walsh's secure servers, along with detailed instructions for coordinating federal raids. By sunrise, FBI agents surrounded the compound. By noon, Emmanuel Rostov and Marcus Fleming were in federal custody, facing life sentences for crimes spanning 3 decades. 6 months later, Daniel and Emma stood on the deck of his private yacht, watching the sunset paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The legal battles were finally over. Rostov's empire had been dismantled, his assets seized, and justice served for both their fathers. Any regrets? Daniel asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Only one. Emma leaned back against his chest. I wish our fathers could have seen this moment. I think they can. Daniel's voice was soft with emotion. And I think they'd be proud of what we built together. Emma turned in his arms, studying the face she'd grown to love more than life itself. Mr. Winchester, are you ready for our next adventure? That depends. What did you have in mind, Mrs. Winchester? Emma's engagement ring caught the dying sunlight as she reached up to kiss her husband. How about we try building something purely legitimate for a change? Maybe start with a family of our own. Daniel's laughter was rich with joy and possibility. I can't think of anything I'd rather build with you. As their yacht sailed toward the horizon, neither Emma nor Daniel looked back toward the shore. They'd fought for justice, found true love, and created a future worth believing in. The past was finally at peace, and their new life together stretched ahead like an endless promise of happiness. In the end, love hadn't just conquered all. It had redeemed everything they'd lost and given them something even more precious, a chance to start over, together, with hearts full of hope and hands ready to build dreams that would last forever.
A single sentence can be a key turning a lock you never knew existed. For Eliza Holloway, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in her mother's medical bills, that sentence was a simple observation. For Gideon Pierce, a man insulated from the world by billions of dollars, it was a crack in the foundation of his entire life. She was just trying to get through her shift. He was just another faceless tycoon in a suit. But when she saw the ring on his finger, a flicker of a memory became an inferno that would threaten to burn down a century-old dynasty. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a casual remark in a cheap diner unraveled a web of lies, betrayal, and a secret that one of America's most powerful families thought was buried forever. The fluorescent lights of the corner booth, diner, hummed a monotonous tune, a sound Eliza Holloway knew better than her own heartbeat. It was the soundtrack to her life, the sizzle of burgers on the griddle, the clatter of cheap ceramic plates, the low murmur of conversations that never seemed to change. At 9:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, The diner was in its nightly lull, a brief respite between the dinner rush and the late-night crowd. Eliza leaned against the cool, stainless steel counter, rolling her shoulders to work out a knot of exhaustion. Every muscle ached with a fatigue that was more than physical. It was the soul-deep weariness of watching her mother Laura slowly fade in a sterile beige hospital room. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Eliza from her thoughts. A man stepped inside, and an invisible curtain of silence seemed to fall over the diner. He wasn't just well-dressed, he was sculpted from a different material than the rest of the world. His suit, a charcoal grey, so dark it was nearly black, fit him with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. His shoes gleamed even under the diner's grimy lights. He had the kind of quiet, absolute confidence that doesn't need to be announced. It simply is. The few remaining patrons instinctively lowered their voices. He chose a booth in the corner, sliding onto the cracked vinyl seat with an economy of motion. Eliza grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her professional smile pasted on. "Welcome to the corner booth. Can I get you started with something?" The man didn't look at the menu. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met hers for a brief, dismissive moment. "Just coffee. Black." His voice was low and resonant, a cello in a room of tin whistles. "Coming right up," Eliza said, retreating to the counter. Her friend and fellow waitress Chloe sidled up to her. "Get a load of Mr. Moneybags. Thinks he's too good for a menu. $10, says he's Gideon Pierce." Eliza frowned as she poured the coffee. "Who?" "Gideon Pierce. Pierce Holdings International. They own half the downtown skyline. My dad used to be a foreman on one of their sites before he got laid off. That guy's picture is in the business section every other week. They say he's ruthless. Turned his family's millions into billions before he was 30. Eliza glanced over at the man. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and severe against the neon-lit street. He looked less like a businessman and more like a predator resting between hunts. She picked up the cup and saucer. "Well, to me, he's just another customer who wants black coffee." She walked back to the booth and set the coffee down. "Here you are, sir." As he reached for the cup, his hand emerged from his cufflink-adorned sleeve, and on his right ring finger, nestled against his skin, was a ring that made Eliza's breath catch in her throat. It wasn't the size or the gleam of it that stopped her. It was the design. An intricate masculine signet ring made of a pale, buttery gold. Etched into the flat face was a sigil, a stylized phoenix, its wings spread wide, with a single tiny sapphire set in its eye, sparkling like a captured star. The band itself was unique, carved to look like intertwined feathers. Eliza's mind reeled. She saw the same ring, not gleaming under a diner light, but resting in a small velvet-lined box on her mother's bedside table. Laura's ring was identical in every detail, down to the tiny, impossibly blue sapphire eye. It was her most cherished possession, the one thing she'd refused to sell, even when the medical bills became a tidal wave threatening to drown them. Her father, she'd always said, had given it to her on his deathbed. "It's a promise, Eliza," she would whisper, her voice thin and reedy. "A promise of what's right." The words tumbled out of Eliza's mouth before she could stop them, a quiet, stunned whisper. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." Gideon Pierce froze his hand, hovering over the coffee cup. He slowly retracted it, and his piercing blue eyes lifted to meet hers. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by a sudden, glacial intensity. He didn't speak. He simply stared, his gaze so sharp and analytical, it felt like he was dissecting her, searching for the punchline to a joke she wasn't telling. "Excuse me," he finally said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt Chloe's worried stare from across the room. She should have just walked away, kept her mouth shut. But the image of her mother's frail hand clutching that identical ring was burned into her mind. "The ring," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "On your hand. It's the same as my mother's. The phoenix, the little sapphire. Everything." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not surprise, not recognition, but something harder, darker. He slowly turned his hand over, examining the ring as if seeing it for the first time. "That's impossible," he stated. It wasn't a guess. It was a verdict. "But it's not," Eliza insisted, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "She's had it my whole life. Her father gave it to her. It's one of a kind," he told her. Gideon Pierce placed his hand flat on the table, the ring, a silent golden accusation. His gaze was cold steel. "This ring," he said, enunciating each word with chilling precision, "has been in the Pierce family for over 100 years. It was custom-made for my great-grandfather, Alaric Pierce. There is no other. There has never been another. You are mistaken." The finality in his tone felt like a slap. He was calling her a liar, or worse, a fool. The injustice of it piled on top of her exhaustion, and fear for her mother ignited a spark of defiance in her. "I'm not mistaken," she said, her voice low but firm. "I've held it in my hands 1,000 times. I know every detail on it. I could draw it from memory." He leaned back, a faint, condescending smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "A fascinating story. What is your name?" "Eliza. Eliza Holloway." "Well, Miss Holloway," he said, picking up his coffee cup and taking a slow, deliberate sip. "Your mother is either a liar or a thief, because the only way she has a ring like this is if it's the one that was stolen from my family 50 years ago." He set the cup down with a soft click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of Eliza's world. Stolen. The word hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Her mother, the gentlest, most honest person she knew, a thief. The accusation was so absurd, so vile, it was like being told the sun rose in the west. Gideon Pierce reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and extracted 3 $100 bills, placing them on the table. It was more than she made in 2 shifts. It was an insult, a dismissal, for the coffee and your time. He said, his eyes already looking past her toward the door. He stood up, the power of his presence filling the small booth. He was already gone, moving on, leaving her in the wreckage of his words. As he walked toward the exit, Eliza found her voice. "She's not a thief." He paused at the door, his back to her. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly across the quiet diner. "Then prove it." The bell chimed again, and he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the middle of the corner booth, her heart pounding, the hum of the lights now sounding like a scream. The 3 crisp bills on the table felt like blood money. She hadn't just served coffee to a billionaire. She had stumbled into a story, his story, and in doing so, she realized with a cold dread, she may have just destroyed her own. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and the anxious thumping of her own heart. Gideon Pierce's words echoed in her head, a liar or a thief. It was preposterous. Laura Holloway was a woman who would walk back into a store to return a few cents of extra change. The accusation was a poison dart, and Eliza felt its venom spreading through her. She found her mother sleeping, her face pale and sunken, against the pristine white of the hospital pillow. The ever-present beep of the cardiac monitor was a fragile, rhythmic reassurance. On the small bedside table next to a glass of water and a well-worn book of poetry sat the small, dark blue velvet box. With trembling hands, Eliza picked it up. The velvet was worn smooth in places. She opened the lid. There it was. The pale gold ring catching the low light from the hallway, the phoenix with its proud spread wings, and the eye a tiny sapphire that seemed to hold a universe of secrets. It was identical. There was no question. "Eliza, honey, is that you?" Laura's voice was weak, raspy. Eliza quickly shut the box and turned, forcing a smile. "Hey, Mum, I didn't mean to wake you. You're late. Rough shift." Laura's eyes, though clouded with illness, were still sharp, still full of a fierce love that had been Eliza's anchor her entire life. The usual. Eliza couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. How could she voice such a monstrous accusation to this frail woman? "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been run over by a very slow, very expensive truck," Laura said with a weak smile. The doctors were in. More talk of options. It all sounds the same. She shifted in the bed, wincing, and her eyes fell on the box in Eliza's hand. Her expression changed. The weariness was replaced by a familiar, guarded look. "You were looking at the ring." Eliza hesitated. "I was just thinking about it. About Dad." Laura's hand, thin and crisscrossed with blue veins, reached out, and she patted the mattress beside her. Eliza sat down. "Your grandfather," Laura corrected gently as she always did. "It was my father who gave it to me, not yours." Eliza's father had been a good man, a mechanic who died in a workshop accident when she was 10, leaving behind nothing but debts and happy memories. The ring predated him. "Right, Granddad," Eliza said, her mind racing. "Mum, tell me about him again. About the ring." Laura's gaze drifted to the window to the dark sky outside. "There's not much to tell that you haven't heard. My father Owen was a quiet man, a brilliant man, an engineer. He worked for a big corporation back east. He said the ring was payment for a promise that was broken by powerful men." "What kind of promise?" Eliza pressed, trying to keep her voice casual. "He never said, only that it was about recognizing what was right. He made me swear to never sell it to keep it safe. He said one day it might be the only proof we have." "Proof of what?" A flicker of fear, real and raw, crossed Laura's face. She looked at Eliza, her eyes pleading. "Leave it be, Eliza. It's an old story. A sad story. It has nothing to do with us anymore. Some doors are best left closed." "But Mum, what if someone else has a reason to open that door?" The words were out before she could stop them. Laura's grip on her hand tightened. "What do you mean? What happened?" Eliza saw the spike on the heart monitor and cursed herself. "Nothing. It's nothing. Just a stupid thing at work." She couldn't burden her mother with this. Not now. She needed to protect her. But the seed of doubt had been planted, a promise that was broken by powerful men. Who were they? And what did any of it have to do with Gideon Pierce? Miles away, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city, Gideon Pierce stood before a floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights spread out below him like a carpet of scattered diamonds. He held a glass of scotch, the amber liquid untouched. He hadn't been able to shake the encounter at the diner. The girl, Eliza Holloway, her wide, honest eyes, her absolute certainty. "My mother has a ring just like yours." It was ludicrous, and yet. He walked over to a heavy mahogany desk and switched on a green-shaded lamp. From a locked drawer he retrieved a leather-bound folio. The Pierce family archives. It was a curated, sanitized history, of course, but it was all he had. He opened it to the section on family heirlooms. There, on a yellowed page, was a photograph of the ring. His ring. The description was clear: the Phoenix signet, commissioned in 1922 by Alaric Pierce, forged by artisan Michel Dubois of Paris. Unique design, symbol of the Pierce family's rebirth from the ashes of the 1921 financial panic. Sole ownership passed down to the male heir of each generation. His father had given him the ring on his 21st birthday. "It represents our resilience, Gideon," he'd said, his voice thick with pride. "We always rise. Never forget that." Gideon's phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the screen. Genevieve Adler. He answered. "Adler." "You're still up," came a crisp, no-nonsense voice. Genevieve Adler was more than his lawyer. She was his fixer, the executor of his will and the keeper of his secrets. "Something has come up," Gideon said, his voice tight. "I need you to run a background check, discreetly." Another hostile takeover. A person. Her name is Eliza Holloway. She works at a diner on 6th Street called The Corner Booth. Her mother's name is Laura Holloway. I want to know everything. Financials, family history, where they came from, who their people were. Everything. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Genevieve was too professional to ask why, but he could feel her curiosity. "Is this a personal or professional matter?" Gideon looked at the ring on his finger, the phoenix staring back at him with its cold, sapphire eye. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted, a rare moment of uncertainty. "But it has the potential to become problematic." He thought back to the story his grandfather used to tell a story, told only in hushed tones after a few too many brandies. About Alaric Pierce's younger brother Daniel, how Daniel had betrayed the family, tried to steal Alaric's designs for a new kind of turbine engine, and in his greed had taken the spare signet ring Alaric had foolishly commissioned. Daniel, the story went, was disowned, cast out. And the ring was lost with him, a symbol of treachery. But the official family history, the one in the folio, never mentioned a second ring. It never mentioned a brother named Daniel. It was a ghost story, a family legend. Until now. Find out who Laura Holloway's father was. Gideon commanded, his voice hardening again, the moment of uncertainty passing. "I want his name. I want to know what he did for a living. And I want to know if he ever, for any reason, crossed paths with my family." He hung up the phone. The waitress had said her grandfather gave her mother the ring. A quiet engineer. Broken promises. Powerful men. For the first time in a very long time, Gideon Pierce felt a sliver of something other than control. It felt like walking on thin ice, hearing the first faint crackle of it, giving way beneath his feet. He had told the girl to prove it. But now he realized with a grim certainty he had to do the same. He had to prove his own story was the truth. 3 days later, the name arrived in a single encrypted line of text from Genevieve Adler Owen Calloway. The name meant nothing to Gideon. He ran it through the private databases of Pierce Holdings, cross-referencing it with employee records, contractor lists, and financial dealings going back a century. Nothing. No Owen Calloway had ever worked for or with his family's company. He felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by suspicion. It was too clean. He was stewing in his office, a vast expanse of glass and steel on the 80th floor, when Genevieve herself appeared at his door. She was a severe woman in her 50s, always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, her grey hair pulled back in a tight chignon. She held a thin file. "You're not going to like this," she said, forgoing any greeting. She placed the file on his desk. Gideon opened it. Inside were public records, a birth certificate for Laura Ann Calloway, born in Wilmington, Delaware. Father Owen Calloway, mother Helen Calloway, and then another document, a patent application from 1968. Inventor Owen Calloway. Invention a novel gearing system for high-torque industrial turbines. Assignee of patent none. Application withdrawn. Gideon's blood ran cold. He recognized the schematic. It was a primitive but unmistakable precursor to the Pierce Mark III turbine, the very invention that had catapulted his grandfather's company from a regional player into a global powerhouse in the early 70s. The invention credited solely to his grandfather, William Pierce. The application was withdrawn on October 12, 1968. Genevieve said, her voice flat. According to banking records I accessed on October 14, 1968, Owen Calloway made a one-time cash deposit of $50,000 into his savings account, a significant sum for an engineer at the time. He quit his job a week later, moved his family, and never worked in engineering again. He died of a heart attack 6 years later, at the age of 42. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. A non-disclosure agreement, a cash payoff, a brilliant idea bought and buried under the Pierce name. So he was bought off. Gideon said the words, tasting like ash. My grandfather stole his invention and paid him to keep quiet. It appears that way, Genevieve confirmed. The $50,000 was likely positioned as a consulting fee to keep it legal. There's no paper trail linking it directly to the patent, of course. Your grandfather was meticulous. And the ring? Gideon asked, looking at his own hand. That, Genevieve said, is where it gets strange. I found the jeweler who bought the assets of Dubois et Fils of Paris. The records are ancient, but their ledgers were like your grandfather, meticulous. In 1922, Alaric Pierce commissioned 2 identical Phoenix signet rings. He paid for both. There's a note in the margin in the artisan's hand. She slid a translated copy across the desk. It read, "One for the builder, one for the dreamer. May they fly together." 2 rings. The family ghost story wasn't a story. It was true. His great-uncle Daniel existed. So Calloway didn't steal the ring, Gideon murmured, thinking aloud. Daniel Pierce, the disowned brother, must have given it to him. But why? As a thank you, a token for a friend, or something more? The puzzle was no longer about a simple diner waitress. It was about the very bedrock of his family's legacy. It was built not just on resilience but on a lie. The knowledge was a corrosive acid in his gut. He had to speak to her again. Eliza was wiping down the counter at the end of another grueling shift when the bell on the door chimed. Her heart sank. It was him. Gideon Pierce didn't enter the diner this time. He stood in the doorway, the city lights framing him like a dark halo. He was dressed more casually in dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, but he still radiated an unapproachable aura of power. "Ms. Holloway," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. "I need to speak with you." Chloe shot her a nervous look. "Eliza, you don't have to." But Eliza knew she did. She untied her apron and hung it on its hook. "It's okay. I'll be right back." She stepped out into the cool night air. The street was loud with the sounds of the city, a stark contrast to the tense silence that fell between them. "Your mother's father." Gideon began getting straight to the point. His name was Owen Calloway. It wasn't a question. Eliza flinched. How did he know that? Yes. What of it? He was an engineer. In 1968, he filed a patent for a turbine gear system. Gideon watched her face, carefully gauging her reaction. Eliza's mind went blank. She knew her grandfather was an engineer, But the details were a fog. Her mother never spoke of his work, only of his sadness. "I don't know anything about that," she said honestly. "I think you do." Gideon countered, his voice sharp with impatience. "Or your mother does. My grandfather, William Pierce, launched a turbine based on an identical design a few years later. It made my family a fortune. Calloway withdrew his patent and accepted a cash payment. This isn't about a stolen ring anymore, is it, Ms. Holloway? This is about a shakedown. Is that your plan? Use this old story to leverage a payday for your mother's medical bills?" The accusation was so cynical, so cruel, it knocked the air from her lungs. Tears of pure rage and frustration sprang to her eyes. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You stand there in your $1,000 sweater looking down on us. My mother is fighting for her life. You think this is about money. This is about her honor. The honor of a man you just admitted your family probably robbed." For the first time, Gideon looked taken aback. He saw not a schemer, but a daughter pushed to her breaking point. "My grandfather told my mother that ring was proof." Eliza continued, her voice rising. "Proof that he was wronged. He didn't take a payoff, he was threatened, forced to sign away his life's work, to protect his family from men like your grandfather. That money wasn't a payment. It was hush money to ensure he never spoke of it again." She was channeling her mother's long-held, unspoken pain. The words felt true, solid, righteous. Gideon was silent for a long moment, the sounds of the city rushing in to fill the space between them. His own certainty was eroding, replaced by the disquieting possibility that the waitress's version of the story, a tale of threats and coercion, was closer to the truth than the sanitized version of a simple business transaction he had constructed. "There were 2 rings," he said, his voice losing its hard edge. "My great-grandfather had 2 made. One for him and one for his brother, Daniel. The family story is that Daniel was a traitor who was cast out." He looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Was your grandfather friends with a man named Daniel Pierce?" Eliza stared at him, bewildered. "Daniel Pierce, I've never heard that name in my life." They were at an impasse. 2 families, 2 rings, and 2 completely different histories that intersected at a single disputed point in the past. One story of a clean, if ruthless, business deal, another of theft and intimidation. And at the center of it all, a ghost named Daniel Pierce, and a ring that was supposed to be a promise. "My mother has the ring," Eliza said, her resolve hardening. "You have your story, I have mine, and I'm going to find out which one is true." Gideon gave a single sharp nod. The condescension was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. "So am I." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the city's shadows, leaving Eliza with the chilling realization that their quest for the truth was now inextricably and dangerously linked. The confrontation with Gideon Pierce left Eliza shaken but resolute. She had defended her family's honor, but his questions echoed in her mind. Daniel Pierce. The name was a blank slate. She returned to the hospital the next day with a new sense of urgency. She found Laura sitting up, looking a little stronger than the day before. The poetry book was open on her lap. "Mum," Eliza began, pulling a chair close. "We need to talk. For real this time. No more secrets." Laura sighed a long, weary sound and closed the book. "I knew this day would come. Seeing you with the box. I knew you wouldn't let it go." She looked at her daughter, her eyes full of a deep, ancient sorrow. "What did he say to you?" "He?" Eliza asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play coy, Eliza," the man from the diner. "You think a man like Gideon Pierce makes a scene, and it doesn't get noticed. Chloe called me." She was worried sick. Eliza's shoulders slumped. He found me. He knows about Grandad Owen. He thinks we're trying to blackmail him. He thinks Grandad sold his invention to the Pierce family. Laura's expression hardened. Sold it, is that what they call it? She scoffed a bitter, rattling sound. Your grandfather was a genius, Eliza. A gentle, trusting soul who thought the world worked on merit and good faith. He was working at a large firm, a competitor to Pierce Industries at the time. He developed his turbine gearing system on his own time. It was his masterpiece. She paused, her gaze, distant, lost in the memory. He made the mistake of mentioning it to a colleague trusting him. That colleague left the company 2 months later for a senior position at Pierce Industries. 6 months after that, your grandfather received a visit from 2 men. They weren't lawyers. They were persuaders. They worked for William Pierce. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt cold. What did they do? Eliza whispered. They didn't lay a hand on him, Laura said, her voice dropping. They were smarter than that. They laid out photographs on our kitchen table. Pictures of me playing in the schoolyard. Pictures of your grandmother leaving the grocery store. They told him what a beautiful family he had. And they told him it would be a shame if something were to happen to them. Then they put a stack of papers in front of him. A non-disclosure agreement and a contract assigning all rights to his invention to a shell corporation owned by Pierce Industries. And an envelope full of cash. The story was uglier than Eliza could have imagined. This wasn't business. It was gangster tactics. He signed everything. Laura continued, her voice trembling. What choice did he have? He took the money because refusing it would have been an act of defiance, and he was too scared to defy them. We moved a week later. He was a broken man, Eliza. They didn't just steal his work, they stole his soul. He died 6 years later, but the truth is, they killed him that day in our kitchen. Tears streamed down Eliza's face. She finally understood the deep well of sadness in her mother, the fear behind her warnings. But the ring, Mom, Eliza pressed gently. Where does the ring come into it? Who is Daniel Pierce? Laura flinched at the name, a genuine startled reaction. Where did you hear that name? Gideon told me. He said his great-grandfather had 2 rings made, one for himself and one for his brother Daniel, who was disowned. Laura was silent for a full minute, her brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel, Owen never said the name Pierce. He only ever called him my friend. His only friend in that terrible time. She began to recount a different part of the story, one she'd never shared. After Owen was forced out, he fell into a deep depression. But one man sought him out. A man who introduced himself only as Daniel. He was a drifter, an outcast, but he had an artist's soul and a hatred for the kind of corporate greed that had destroyed Owen. He had heard what happened to Owen through the engineering grapevine. This Daniel, Laura recounted, told your grandfather that he too had been betrayed by a powerful family. He understood what it was to have everything stolen by your own blood. They became friends, 2 broken men finding solace in each other's company. Before Daniel left town for good, he gave Owen the ring. She looked at Eliza, her eyes intense. He told Owen this was meant to symbolize a shared dream between brothers. It was forged in hope and tainted by greed. It belongs to the wronged, not the wrongdoer. Keep it as proof that integrity has a value that money can't buy. One day, the phoenix will rise for the right person. Owen cherished that ring more than the invention itself. It was a symbol that he wasn't alone in his suffering. So Daniel Pierce wasn't a traitor. He was another victim, and he had given the ring his own birthright to another wronged man as an act of solidarity. The story was so much more profound, so much more tragic than Gideon's cold family ledger. At the same time, Gideon was in his family's ancestral home, a sprawling stone estate an hour outside the city. He rarely came here. It felt more like a museum than a home filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. In the library, a room panelled in dark wood that smelled of old paper and polish, he met his cousin, Robert Pierce. Robert was a few years older, with a practiced smile and the easy charm of a man who had never worked a day in his life. He managed the family's charitable foundation, a role that required him to attend galas and cut ribbons. "Gideon, to what do we owe the honour?" Robert said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "Tired of the concrete jungle. I'm looking for information." "Robert," Gideon said, cutting to the chase. "About great-uncle Daniel." Robert's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Daniel, the black sheep, that old ghost story. What's gotten into you?" "I have reason to believe the story is true, and I need to know the details. The real details, not the sanitized version." Robert swirled the brandy in his snifter, suddenly looking thoughtful. "Well, you know the legend. He was the younger brother, the artist, the dreamer. Alaric was the pragmatist, the builder. Daniel apparently accused Alaric of stealing his ideas for the company's early successes. Tried to stage a boardroom coup. When it failed, he vanished, but not before stealing a valuable ring and supposedly selling company secrets to a rival." Robert sighed dramatically. A classic tale of sibling rivalry and betrayal. It's why the line of succession has always been so rigidly defined, to prevent another Daniel. This was the story Gideon had always known, but hearing it now, it felt thin, theatrical, a convenient narrative to justify Alaric's consolidation of power. "And you believe that?" Gideon asked. "Why shouldn't I?" "It's our history," Robert said with a shrug. "It's a bit dramatic, sure, but it explains why the family closed ranks, why Grandpa William was so aggressive in his business dealings. He was protecting the family legacy from vultures from another betrayal." He leaned forward, his voice conspiratorial. Why the sudden interest? Did one of his descendants crawl out of the woodwork looking for a handout? The question was casual, but the look in Robert's eyes was sharp, probing. Gideon felt a sudden instinctual distrust. Robert had always seemed vapid, but perhaps that was a carefully constructed facade. "It's a private matter," Gideon said, his voice clipped. Of course," Robert said, leaning back, the charming smile returning. "Well, if you want to dig up old bones, be my guest. The old family papers are in the West Wing study. Gramps Williams' private correspondence. Knock yourself out. Just don't be surprised if the ghost you find is uglier than you imagined." Gideon left Robert with his brandy and went to the study. The room was dusty, unused for years. He found the boxes of letters tied with faded ribbon. For hours he sorted through them, reading his grandfather's elegant cursive script. Most of it was business. But then he found a series of letters from the late 1960s, addressed to his grandfather's head of security. The content made him feel ill. There were updates on the surveillance of a man named Owen Calloway, reports on his daughter's school schedule, his wife's daily routine, and then a final chilling memo. Subject Calloway has been neutralized, asset secured. He is no longer a threat. Neutralized, asset secured. Eliza Holloway's story was true. It was all true. His family's fortune was built on theft and cemented with threats. The weight of the discovery was crushing. But as he continued to sift through the papers, he found something else. Something that didn't fit either his story or Eliza's. It was a single folded note, separate from the letters tucked into the back of a ledger. It was in his grandfather William's handwriting, but it was frantic, almost illegible. He knows. R found him. He can ruin everything. Daniel is the key. Must protect the name. The note was undated. Who was he, and who was R. Robert? It seemed too convenient. And what did it mean? Daniel is the key. Daniel was supposed to be a ghost, a long-vanished traitor. But this note, written decades after Daniel's disappearance, spoke of him as a present active threat. Gideon stood in the dusty, silent study, holding two conflicting testaments. In one hand, the sordid truth of his grandfather's crime against Owen Calloway. In the other, a cryptic note that suggested a deeper, more complex conspiracy was at play. The story was no longer just about his grandfather and Eliza's. There was a third player, a hidden thread, and the name of that thread was Daniel. The discovery of his grandfather's note threw Gideon into a state of focused obsession. He knows. R found him. Daniel is the key. It was a cipher, and Gideon knew he couldn't crack it alone. The animosity between him and Eliza had melted away, replaced by the grim reality that they were the only two people with a stake in the complete truth. He found her where he knew she'd be, in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee with the same haunted expression he saw in the mirror. He sat down opposite her, placing a thin file on the table between them. "Your mother was right," he said, his voice devoid of its usual authority, filled instead with a quiet gravity. "About everything. The threats, the coercion. My grandfather put your family through hell." He pushed the file forward. It contained the copies of the surveillance reports on the Calloway family. "This is the proof." Eliza opened the file, her hands trembling as she read the cold clinical descriptions of her mother as a little girl being watched. Her face paled. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of vindication and horror. "Why are you showing me this? Because my story is falling apart, and so is yours," Gideon said. "There's more to it." He told her about the note. Daniel is the key. It was written by my grandfather, William, long after your grandfather was silenced. He was scared of someone who knew the truth about Daniel. Eliza frowned. But Daniel gave my grandfather the ring. He was an outcast, a victim like Owen. "That's what he told your grandfather," Gideon countered. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if Daniel's disappearance wasn't just about him being cast out? We have two stories, yours and mine, but they're both based on what we were told by people who were themselves betrayed or lying. We need a primary source, an objective truth. Where do we find that? Eliza asked, the weight of a multi-generational conspiracy settling on her shoulders. "The rings," Gideon said, a spark of inspiration in his eyes. "They're the one constant. They're the origin point. My great-grandfather Alaric commissioned them from a Parisian artisan, Michel Dubois. The business is gone, but I found the firm that acquired its assets, and more importantly, its records. The ledgers. In Paris." Eliza's heart sank. That was a world away. "I had the relevant pages scanned and sent over this morning," Gideon said, tapping his phone. "The high-resolution images are waiting in my office. I need another set of eyes. Your eyes. You know your ring better than anyone." An hour later, Eliza found herself in a place she could never have imagined, Gideon Pierce's office on the 80th floor. The silence was absolute, the view of the city breathtaking. On a massive screen that covered one wall was a high-resolution image of a page from an old leather-bound ledger. The script was elegant, spidery French. A translated transcript scrolled beside it. They pored over the entry for Alaric Pierce's 1922 commission. As Genevieve had discovered, It listed 2 identical rings. But as they zoomed in on the artisan's original French notes, Eliza saw something the translator had missed. The translator's note read, "1 for the builder, 1 for the dreamer." But the original French was more specific. Eliza had taken 4 years of French in high school, and while she was rusty, one phrase jumped out at her. L'un pour le bâtisseur de l'Empire, l'autre pour le gardien de l'âme. "That's not dreamer," Eliza said, slowly pointing at the screen. "Gardien de l'âme. It means guardian of the soul." Gideon zoomed in, reading the phrase. "Guardian of the soul." He repeated the words, feeling heavy and significant. A builder of an empire and a guardian of its soul. It wasn't a rivalry. It was meant to be a partnership, a balance. This changed everything. Alaric and Daniel weren't meant to be competitors. They were meant to be 2 halves of a whole. The story of Daniel's betrayal was a complete fabrication. As they scanned further down the page, Gideon noticed a small annotation next to the entry, added in a different hand, and with different ink. It was dated 1945. "What's this?" he murmured, enlarging the note. The French was spidery and difficult to read. "Reçu une lettre de Monsieur Daniel Pierce." The note began. "Received a letter from Mr. Daniel Pierce." Gideon translated haltingly. "He asks for a modification to the 2nd ring, to the inside of the band. He is no longer a Pierce. He is something else." Gideon and Eliza exchanged a look. "No longer a Pierce," Eliza whispered. "He changed his name," Gideon realized. "When he was cast out, he abandoned the family name entirely." The note continued. "Il a demandé que j'inscrive un nom. Le nom Owen." "He asked me to inscribe a name." Gideon read his voice, catching. "The name Owen." Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Owen, my grandfather's name. But this was in 1945. My grandfather wouldn't have met Daniel for another 20 years. "It's not your grandfather's name," Gideon said, a sudden shocking realization dawning on him. He typed furiously on his keyboard, pulling up his family's genealogy records, going back further than he ever had before. His fingers flew, his mind racing. He found his great-grandfather, Alaric Pierce. Then his great-grandmother, Beatrice. And then he found her family tree. Her maiden name was Beaumont. And her father, Alaric's father-in-law, his name was Owen Beaumont, a wealthy shipping magnate who had bankrolled Alaric's early ventures, who had died in 1944. The truth hit them both like a physical blow. The inscription wasn't for Eliza's grandfather, it was a memorial. "The ring," Eliza breathed, piecing it together. "The ring wasn't for 2 brothers to share, it was for a father and son. Alaric Pierce and his son, William, my grandfather." "No," Gideon set his eyes wide with the horrifying clarity of the truth. "Alaric didn't have a son named William in 1922. His son William was born in 1925. In 1922, Alaric Pierce had 1 child, a son born in 1905, his firstborn son. He clicked one last time, and a black-and-white photograph filled the screen. It was a formal portrait of 2 young men, both handsome and proud. One was clearly a young Alaric Pierce. The other, the dreamer, the guardian of the soul, was his brother. Underneath the photograph was the caption, "Alaric and Daniel Pierce, 1921. And beneath that, in the official genealogical record, was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The entry for Daniel Pierce listed his full name, Daniel Owen Pierce. Daniel was the Owen the ring was inscribed for. It wasn't a memorial to his father-in-law. He was reclaiming his middle name, the only part of his identity his brother couldn't take from him. The twist was so profound, so complete, that the room fell silent. The entire family history was a lie. Daniel wasn't the younger brother. Based on his birth year, he was the older brother. He should have been the heir. Alaric was the younger son, the builder. And William Pierce Gideon's grandfather wasn't Alaric's only son. He was the second son. Daniel was Alaric's firstborn. No, wait. Gideon looked at the birth dates again. Daniel born 1905. William born 1925. That couldn't be right. They weren't brothers. Alaric and Daniel were brothers. But William wasn't Daniel's brother. He was his nephew. The story they'd been chasing was wrong. The players were wrong. Eliza's grandfather hadn't met a random outcast. He had met Daniel Owen Pierce, the true disinherited heir to the Pierce fortune. And Daniel hadn't given him a token of solidarity. He had given him the ring, his own ring, inscribed with his own name for safekeeping. It was a piece of evidence, a dormant claim to an empire. And William Pierce Gideon's grandfather hadn't just stolen an invention from Owen Calloway. He had done it to suppress a man who had been in contact with the one person on earth who could challenge his own father's, and therefore his own legitimacy, his uncle Daniel Pierce. The note he knows. Found him. Daniel is the key. Snapped into focus. It was Owen Calloway. Was likely Robert's father or grandfather, another part of the conspiracy. And Daniel was the key because his existence and his connection to Calloway threatened to unravel the foundational lie upon which William Pierce's entire life and fortune were built. They hadn't just silenced an inventor. They were silencing a witness. The truth pieced together from the artisan's ledger was more corrupt than they had ever imagined. Daniel Owen Pierce, the rightful heir, had been systematically erased from history. Gideon's grandfather, William, had silenced Owen Calloway, not over a simple invention, but to bury the foundational lie of their family's power. It became terrifyingly clear that Gideon's cousin Robert knew this dirty secret and was positioning himself to use it as a weapon in a corporate power play. There was only one place to force a reckoning: the annual Pierce Foundation charity gala, Robert's personal stage. For Eliza, her mother's presence was non-negotiable. This fight was no longer just about uncovering the truth, it was about delivering justice, and for that to happen, the victim's voice had to be heard. The grand ballroom glittered with false brilliance, a perfect setting for the unmasking. Robert was in his element, the charming, benevolent host. That was until he saw Gideon and Eliza cutting a path directly toward him. His practiced smile became a brittle facade. "Robert," Gideon began, his voice low and cold, cutting through the pleasantries. "The games are over. We know about Daniel Owen Pierce, the true heir." Robert scoffed, preparing a condescending dismissal. "Gideon, you've clearly been listening to fairy tales from a—" He was cut off by a woman's voice, weak but amplified by a microphone that sliced through the ballroom's polite chatter. "His fairy tale cost my father his life." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance where Laura Holloway sat in a wheelchair, her gaze locked on Robert with an intensity that defied her frailness. "William Pierce destroyed my father because he was friends with the honorable man your family threw away," Laura declared. "My father was forced to keep your secret. I will not." As gasps rippled through the stunned crowd, the massive screens on stage meant to display photos of the Foundation's good works flickered. Eliza held up her phone, and the damning image from the Parisian Ledger filled the screens for all to see, the entry detailing the commission for 2 rings, and the name to be inscribed within the second Owen. Trapped, Robert stared from Laura's accusing face to the irrefutable proof on the screens. He was cornered by a ghost from the past and evidence set in stone. Gideon stepped forward, his voice ringing with chilling authority. "My family's legacy is built on a lie," he announced to the captive audience. A lie my grandfather silenced a man to protect, and a lie my cousin he turned pinning Robert with a glare, planned to use for his own personal gain. The public accusation pushed Robert over the edge. His carefully constructed composure shattered into pure, unrestrained rage. "You fool, Gideon," he hissed, forgetting the live microphone just inches from his mouth. "I was trying to protect us. I knew the truth, and I kept it buried. You and your pathetic little waitress have ruined everything." The confession, amplified for all to hear, echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. In a single self-incriminating breath, Robert had confirmed a century of corruption and authored his own spectacular downfall. He stood alone, exposed under the glittering chandeliers, the king of a corrupt castle that had just crumbled to dust around him. The aftermath of the gala was a whirlwind of headlines and resignations. The Pierce dynasty was shaken, but in the ensuing quiet, it was being reborn, not broken. Weeks later, in a sun-drenched private hospital suite, a fragile peace had settled. Laura Holloway, looking out over a green garden, had a light in her eyes that Eliza hadn't seen in years. The weight of a lifetime of secrets had finally been lifted. Gideon Pierce entered the room quietly, no longer an untouchable tycoon, but a man humbled by the truth. He didn't offer empty apologies. Instead, he placed a leather-bound document on the table beside Laura's bed. The Daniel Owen Pierce Foundation, he said, his voice steady and sincere. It will exist to fund the independent inventors and artists my family tried to crush. A significant portion of my family's fortune will serve as its endowment, with the estate of Owen Calloway as its first honorary beneficiary. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. It was more than restitution. It was justice forged into a new legacy. Laura simply reached out and placed her hand over Gideon's. "You have honored him," she whispered. "You have honored them all." Gideon then looked at Eliza, pulling his own phoenix ring from his finger and placing it next to the one that had started it all. The two rings, twin flames of pale gold, lay side by side, finally reunited. "One for the builder, one for the guardian," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "I can rebuild the company, but it has been missing its soul for a century. Help me bring it back, Eliza." It was an offer not of money or power, but of purpose. Looking at the two ring symbols of a promise, finally kept Eliza saw a clear path forward. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and her heart full. "Let's give them a legacy to believe in." A single sentence in a late-night diner set in motion a chain of events that rewrote history. Eliza Holloway, a waitress who fought for her mother's honor, proved that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a power that no fortune can suppress. And Gideon Pierce, a billionaire trapped in a gilded cage of lies, discovered that true wealth isn't about what you inherit, but about the integrity you choose to build. Their story reminds us that every family has its secrets, and that it sometimes takes the courage of an outsider to bring the truth to light, allowing the phoenix to finally rise from the ashes. If this story of truth, justice, and the incredible power of one person's voice moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story that's more than just fiction. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life dramas that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Click that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for listening.